Over 86% of Americans have a budget right now. Most of them are still living paycheck to paycheck.
So here's the question nobody asks. If having a budget was the answer, why isn't it working?
The average American household spent $77,158 last year.
That is a staggering 44% jump from just 10 years ago.
Meanwhile, in January of this year, Americans saved just 4.5% of their income.
Financial experts tell us we need at least 10 to 15% just to survive retirement and cover basic emergencies. We aren't even hitting half of that. And here's the part that should really make you angry. 29% of Americans, almost 1 in 3, currently have more credit card debt than emergency savings. This isn't happening because people are inherently irresponsible or lazy.
It's happening because nobody ever told them the truth about how budgeting actually works in the real world.
Here is what I mean. Behavioral economists have spent decades studying why people break their budgets, and the answer isn't a lack of willpower.
It isn't a lack of discipline. It is biology. Your brain's emotional center, the limbic system, is the part that lights up when you see something you want. This system is neurologically faster and stronger than your prefrontal cortex, the logical part of your brain that knows you shouldn't buy it.
Every single time.
The budgeting methods you were taught, the 50-30-20 rule, the complex spreadsheets, the just track every penny advice,
were all designed without accounting for how the human brain actually makes decisions under stress, fatigue, and emotional pressure. Which means if you've ever made a budget and abandoned it by February, that wasn't a character flaw.
It was a design flaw. To understand why we are failing, we have to look at the sheer scale of the mountain we are climbing. According to WalletHub's 2026 statistics,
while the vast majority of us are trying to follow a budget, 83% of us say that increasing costs are the single biggest obstacle to sticking to it.
It's not that you're bad with money. It's that the cost of existing has outpaced the traditional methods we use to manage it. In June 2025, we hit a grim milestone. The average American consumer debt crossed 6 figures for the first time in history, reaching an average of $104,755 per person.
We are carrying more weight than ever before.
Yet we are using the same outdated maps our parents used. When we look at the state of financial literacy today, the numbers are sobering. As of 2025, only 31% of U.S. households had a documented long-term financial plan. Even more concerning, 33% had absolutely no financial plan of any kind. We are flying blind into an economy that is becoming increasingly volatile. The result of this disconnect is a national epidemic of financial anxiety.
In 2025, 80% of Americans reported feeling financially anxious, a steady increase from previous years.
More than a third of the population is experiencing moderate to severe anxiety, specifically because of their bank accounts.
This anxiety isn't just a feeling, it's a paralyzing force that makes logical planning almost impossible.
When your brain is in survival mode due to financial stress, your prefrontal cortex, the part of you that can stick to a budget, essentially shuts down. You are biologically programmed to seek immediate relief, which often leads to the very impulse spending that makes the budget fail in the first place. It is a vicious cycle. And the traditional advice to just try harder is like telling someone to breathe harder during an asthma attack. In this video, we are going to deconstruct the myths of modern budgeting. I am going to show you exactly what is broken in the traditional system, why your brain is working against you, and what the latest research in behavioral economics actually says works for the modern American household. To truly understand why the old rules of budgeting are failing us, we have to look at the math that no one wants to talk about. For decades, the gold standard of personal finance has been the 50-30-20 rule. 50% for needs, 30% for wants, and 20% for savings. But in 2026, that formula feels less like a guide and more like a cruel joke for the average American household. The reality is that the needs category has exploded.
Between 2014 and 2024, the average household expenditure jumped by 44%.
Think about that. Even if you haven't upgraded your lifestyle, even if you're driving the same car and living in the same house, you are paying nearly 50% more just to maintain the status quo. When 70 or 80% of your income is swallowed by housing, healthcare, insurance, and groceries, there is no 30% for wants left to cut. This is where the traditional budgeting advice fails. Most gurus tell you to cut out the morning latte or cancel your streaming services. But you can't frugal your way out of a 44% increase in the cost of living. In 2025, a staggering 63% of Americans reported that they saved less than the year before, specifically because of the rising cost of living. We are being squeezed by a pincer movement. Prices are rising. At the same time, our psychological ability to resist spending is being systematically eroded. This brings us to the invisible enemy of your budget, the dopamine economy. Every app on your phone, every targeted ad in your feed, and every one-click checkout button was designed by engineers who understand your brain better than you do. Remember what we discussed about the limbic system? Corporations spend billions of dollars every year to bypass your prefrontal cortex and speak directly to your emotional center. When you are stressed from a long day of work, a day where you likely felt underpaid and overworked, your brain craves a hit of dopamine to regulate your mood. In the past, that might have required a trip to the mall.
Today, it's a 3-second interaction on your smartphone while you're lying in bed.
This is why budgeting failures are rarely caused by laziness. You are essentially bringing a knife to a gunfight. You are trying to use a spreadsheet to fight a multi-billion-dollar algorithm designed to make you spend. And the consequences of losing that fight are getting heavier. We entered 2026 with 60% of Americans feeling uncomfortable with the size of their emergency funds. That's not just a statistic. That's millions of people lying awake at night, worrying what happens if the water heater breaks or the car transmission fails. For 29% of the country, that fear is a reality. They already own more to credit card companies than they have in the bank. But here is the most frustrating part. While costs are rising and debt is mounting, the safety nets we were promised aren't performing. In 2025, only 12% of Americans actually benefited from high-yield savings rates. The rest saw their modest savings lose purchasing power every single month. This creates a sense of financial nihilism. If you feel like you'll never be able to afford a home or that you'll never save enough to retire, your brain makes a logical, albeit destructive, decision. Why bother? If the goal of retirement feels impossible, why not spend that money now on something that makes me feel good today? This is why 58% of American workers feel their retirement savings are behind schedule, with 36% having less than $10,000 total saved. We've been told that budgeting is about math. It's not. It's about managing the gap between our biological impulses and an economic reality that is increasingly hostile to the middle class. If we want to fix our finances, we have to stop looking at the numbers and start looking at the system, both the one in the economy and the one inside our heads. If the math is so simple, spend less than you earn, why is it so hard to execute? To find the answer, we have to look at the planning fallacy. This is a phenomenon where humans consistently underestimate how much time, energy, and money a task will cost them. When you sit down on a Sunday night to write a budget, you are doing so as your ideal self. This version of you is well-rested, logical, and highly disciplined. But you don't live your life as your ideal self. You live your life as your real self, the version of you that is exhausted after a 10-hour shift, stuck in traffic, and dealing with a crying toddler or a demanding boss. Your ideal self creates the budget, but your real self is the one who has to execute it. And the real self is governed by what psychologists call decision fatigue. Every time you resist an impulse, skipping the expensive snack, choosing the generic brand, or saying no to an invitation, you use up a finite resource of willpower. By 6 p.m., most Americans have completely depleted that resource.
This is why the majority of budget breaking happens in the evening. It's not a lack of character, it's a biological system crash. This leads us to the most dangerous lie in personal finance, the idea that credit card debt is always the result of overspending on luxuries. In reality, for a huge portion of the population, credit cards have become a high-interest bridge to cover the gap created by the rising cost of living. When consumer debt hit that $104,755 average in 2025, it wasn't just because of designer handbags and vacations. It was because when your rent goes up by $300 and your paycheck stays the same, the credit card becomes the only way to keep the lights on. The problem is that once you enter this cycle, the interest payments become a tax on the poor. You're no longer just paying for your life. You're paying for the privilege of having paid for your life 3 months ago. This is why 60% of people feel uncomfortable with their emergency funds. They aren't just lacking savings, they are actively bleeding money to interest.
We also have to address the social comparison trap. In the 1950s, you compared yourself to your neighbor. Today, you compare your behind-the-scenes reality to the highlight reel of thousands of people on social media. This triggers the limbic system's threat response. If we feel we are falling behind our social peers, our brain treats it as a survival threat, urging us to spend money we don't have to maintain a status we can't afford.
But here is the truth that nobody tells you. The people you are trying to keep up with are likely part of the 80% who are feeling financially anxious. They are likely part of the 36% who have less than $10,000 saved for retirement. You are competing to win a game where the prize is a mountain of debt and a lifetime of stress. So, if the traditional budget is a design flaw, and our brains are wired for impulse, and the economy is rigged against us, is there actually a way out? The answer is yes, but it requires moving away from restrictive budgeting and toward behavioral architecture. We have to stop trying to change our nature and start changing our environment. So, how do we fix a system that seems rigged against us? The answer isn't a better spreadsheet. It's behavioral architecture. Since we know our willpower is a finite resource that fails us by 6 p.m., we have to stop relying on it entirely. We need to build a financial environment where the right decision is the automatic decision. The first step is moving from tracking to separation. Most people fail because they keep their bill money, their grocery money, and their fun money in one single digital bucket. This forces your brain to do complex math every time you swipe your card. Instead, you need to automate the friction. Set up a system where your paycheck is split before you ever see it. One account for fixed bills, one for savings, however small, and one spending account that acts as your safe-to-spend limit. When that account hits zero, you're done. No math, no willpower, just a hard boundary that protects your prefrontal cortex from making a mistake. The second shift is acknowledging the 4.5% saving gap. If Americans are only saving 4.5%, while experts demand 15%, the psychological weight of that failure often leads to giving up entirely. But research in behavioral economics suggests that micro-wins are more effective for long-term retention than grand goals. If you can't hit 15%, don't do nothing. 5%, then 6%. The goal is to build the neural pathway of saving rather than the actual mountain of gold. Third, we have to dismantle the financial anxiety that 80% of us are feeling. Anxiety lives in the unknown. This is why that 31% of households with a documented plan are so much more resilient, not because they have more money, but because they have removed the threat of the unknown. Even a bad plan is better than no plan, because a plan moves the conversation from your emotional limbic system to your logical prefrontal cortex. The truth is, budgeting as we've been taught it is a relic of a different era. It was designed for a world where costs were stable, social media didn't exist, and companies weren't using supercomputers to steal your attention. In 2026, sticking to a budget isn't just about math, it's an act of rebellion. It's a refusal to let an algorithm or an inflationary cycle dictate your peace of mind.
If you've struggled in the past, stop blaming your discipline. Start looking at your design. Stop trying to fight your brain's biology. And start building systems that work with it. The average American debt may be 6 figures, and the cost of living may be climbing. But your financial future isn't written in the stars. It's written in the systems you build today.
You don't need a better character.
You just need a better blueprint. And now that you know the truth about why the old way failed, you finally have the power to build something that actually works.